मंगल ढिल्लोन चैनल एक ऐसा चैनल जो आपका जीवन बदल सकता है, जैसे अब तक बहुतों का जीवन बदल चुका है। मंगल ढिल्लोन चैनल।
It seems that the turban of the Sikhs has become a recurring controversial issue on various occasions in different parts of the world. Recently, it has surfaced in France, perhaps due to the lack of proper communication and awareness about its importance. The French are respected the world over for their constitutional stand in protecting human rights and the spirit of liberation. Sikhism stands for equality, liberty, and humanity, for which the Sikhs have made countless sacrifices in the past to protect the self-respect of humanity along with their faith and unique identity. If we look at the religious history of the Sikhs, we find that the Sikh faith was originated in the 15th century by its first prophet Sri Guru Nanak Dev Ji to counter extreme religious fundamentalism and discrimination of caste, color and creed. He travelled extensively throughout his entire life to spread the message of equality, humanity and liberty amongst the oppressed, deprived, downtrodden, untouchables and blind followers of ritualism. To uphold the same faith, principles and philosophy of Sikhism, the fifth prophet of the Sikhs had to sacrifice his life by going through extreme torture. He was made to sit on a burning steel plate while hot burning sand was poured over his body as per the orders of the ruthless Mughal rulers for refusing to embrace Islam. The ninth prophet of the Sikhs, Sri Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, also had to sacrifice his life to protect the same philosophy, principles and identity of the Sikhs while protecting the oppressed, helpless Hindus. He was publicly beheaded by the merciless Mughal rulers at Chandni Chowk near the Delhi Red Fort in 1675 for not embracing Islam. This Sikh temple was built in his memory to pay a humble tribute to his martyrdom. All the 10 prophets of the Sikhs wore turbans, and their followers are also expected to abide by their philosophy, principles and the Sikh code of conduct while maintaining the same identity, or they cease to be true Sikhs of their prophets. According to historians, the 10th prophet Sri Guru Gobind Singh Ji had to fight 14 defensive battles against the fundamentalist aggressors and invaders to protect religious freedom, self-respect of humanity and the basic philosophy of Sikhism along with its unique identity. When the 10th prophet realized that the Muslim and Hindu fundamentalist rulers were determined to defeat his mission of uplifting the human spirit, he decided to transform the humble Sikhs into a force of unique saint soldiers who would rise above all worldly discriminations and be ready to make any sacrifice to protect their faith and distinct identity along with the oppressed, downtrodden and weak till their last breath. So the 10th prophet laid the foundation of the Khalsa, the pure, on 13th April 1699 at Anandpur Sahib in Punjab, India, and the Khalsa is also referred to as a saint soldier to date. For this unusual transformation, the 10th prophet baptized his 5 beloved ones in an extremely inspiring and unique spiritual ceremony and transformed them into the Khalsa, who believe that all human beings are equal and belong to one God, which is why they are beyond all worldly discriminations of caste, color, race, religion and creed. The Prophet then bestowed upon the 5 pure beloved ones the status of Guruship equivalent to his own stature after baptizing them. According to the edict of the Prophet, every devout Sikh or Khalsa must always sport 5 Ks, which are long unshorn hair covered with a turban for divine enlightenment and creating a distinct identity, a wooden comb for keeping the hair neat, an iron bracelet for righteousness, a special underwear for high morality, and a small steel dagger for self-defense and to protect the weak. These were the basic and fundamental requirements to be a Khalsa as per the commandments of the 10th Prophet Sri Guru Gobind Singh Ji. The long unshorn hair covered with the turban is the main symbol of the 5 Ks, and without it, all the other removable Ks are meaningless, as it is an indispensable part of the complete moral, physical and spiritual identity of a Sikh. Therefore, cutting their hair is seen as an act of apostasy, because according to Sikhism, the 10th seat of consciousness, the highest state of enlightenment, reveals itself in the head, which is complete and perfect as a seat of revelation only when the hair is intact. As per historical records, right from the first baptism over the last 3 centuries, innumerable Sikhs have been baptized to become a Khalsa, the pure. Even in the modern world of today, any Sikh sporting the 5 Ks as per the commandment of the Prophet is a Khalsa, the pure. Therefore, forcing him to remove any of the Ks for any reason is like asking him to betray his Prophet, his religion, his faith, his identity and his entire heritage. However, to adapt geographically and culturally to the requirements of various legal systems, the Sikhs try to wear some of the Ks symbolically. The apparent changes and alterations in the form and style of the turban also indicate their willingness to move along with the ever-changing times. But their hair, along with the turban, being the main symbol of the 5 Ks, is beyond any compromise, because nothing else can give a Sikh the deep sense of belonging to his heritage besides preserving his distinct identity and keeping him firmly anchored to his roots. According to historians, the creation of the Khalsa was unacceptable to the rulers of the time, and it unleashed the fury of all aggressive fundamentalist forces, which led to an irreparable loss and endless agony for the Sikhs. One of the most ironical aspects of this period is that all the aggressors were so blinded by fundamentalism that they did not learn any lesson from the Mughal generals who surrendered to the 10th Prophet during fierce battles after they realized and understood the philosophy of Sikhism, which did not permit even the Prophet himself to attack the generals of the enemy first, who had in fact challenged him to combat. Various historical records have confirmed that endless treacherous attacks and conspiracies of the fundamentalist forces for years led the 10th Prophet to abandon his fort and eventually to the martyrdom of his 4 sons for the protection of his faith and the identity of the Sikhs. His 2 elder sons, aged 14 and 18, attained martyrdom at this historical place while fighting against a formidable force of 10,000 Mughal soldiers with just 40 saint soldiers of the Prophet. This Sikh temple has been built at that very place to pay a humble tribute to the martyrdom of the sons of the Prophet and the other great Sikh martyrs who laid down their lives selflessly for the protection of their faith and identity. The other 2 younger sons of the Prophet, aged 7 and 9, along with their grandmother, were taken prisoner by the Mughals, and both of them were publicly buried alive at this historical place for upholding their faith and distinct identity. This Sikh temple stands in their fond memory at that very place where they attained martyrdom while protecting their unique faith and identity. The 10th prophet defended his faith during his lifetime by sacrificing his whole family while fighting against all the fundamentalist forces. Eventually, on the night of his heavenly departure, at this sacred place where the Sikh temple still stands in his remembrance, his Sikhs vowed to him that they would uphold his teachings, his faith and distinct identity given to them by him till their very last breath, and they have upheld it through the centuries. So if we look at it minutely from a historical perspective, the long hair, a turban, an iron bracelet, or a small steel dagger of a devout Sikh symbolizes the endless struggle and countless sacrifices of Sikh martyrs over the past 3 centuries. Thus, telling a devout Sikh or a Khalsa to be without any one of these symbols of faith for any reason is like asking him to cut himself off from centuries of selfless sacrifices and his unique heritage, which will be an irreparable loss to him, while in doing so, it would not benefit any other system, government or organization in any way or form. Today, if we look back objectively, it may appear that perhaps all this carnage, devastation and immense loss of life could have been averted if the Sikh prophets and their followers would have surrendered to the fundamentalist forces by giving up their faith, distinct identity and their principles of Sikhism, which protect the self-respect of humanity, preach equality and uphold the liberty of human spirit and the universality of one God. But they chose to stand by their faith while protecting their unique identity. And today, if that identity is questioned for any reason whatsoever, it is like questioning their faith and all that which has been sacrificed for its protection and preservation during the last 5 centuries. According to historians, after the heavenly departure of the 10th prophet, his devout Sikh, Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, took charge of the Khalsa forces as per the Guru's commandment and succeeded in establishing his supremacy over the Mughals for some period of time. But eventually, he was captured on 7th December 1715 by the mighty Mughal forces after the loss of thousands in a long, fierce battle. He was brought to Delhi in a cage along with the other prisoners, his wife and 3-year-old son Ajay Singh in a most humiliating manner. Mughal forces carried the heads of hundreds of executed Sikh soldiers on pikes to frighten the captured ones in order to force them to embrace Islam and denounce their identity. Finally, after unimaginable humiliation and torture lasting for about 3 months, Baba Banda Singh Bahadur and his soldiers were given the choice of embracing Islam or the most horrendous death. He, along with all his Sikh soldiers, chose death rather than to betray the Prophet by embracing Islam. Baba Banda Singh Bahadur's 3-year-old son was cut into pieces by the executioners, and his pulsating heart was thrust into Banda Singh Bahadur's mouth, who stood unmoved like a statue, completely resigned to the will of God. According to all historians, he bore his torture with utmost dignity and serenity. Neither Baba Banda Singh Bahadur nor the other devout Sikhs of Prophet Guru Gobind Singh deserted their faith and identity even when faced with such a horrifying death. After Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, a time came when Sikhs were being hunted like wild beasts. As per historical accounts, a price was put on their heads, and thousands who refused to convert to Islam by denouncing their faith and identity were put to death in various inhuman ways. As per historical evidence, during this period, a devout Sikh, Bhai Mani Singh, was cut limb by limb, while Bhai Diwan Singh, Bhai Mehtab Singh, Bhai Subeg Singh and Bhai Shahbaz Singh were among the countless devout Sikhs of the Prophet whose bodies were broken on wooden wheels as a punishment for not denouncing their faith and distinct identity to embrace Islam. Another devout Sikh, Bhai Taru Singh, was arrested and brought to Lahore for execution. He too was asked to denounce his faith and embrace Islam, but on his blunt refusal, his long hair was mercilessly scraped off along with his scalp, but he stood the torture manfully, reciting the words of the Prophet till he passed away in July 1745. According to Cunningham, a British historian, the determined Sikh of the Prophet would neither yield his conscience nor the symbol of his conviction, and his words echo this truth to date. He said, "The hair, the turban, the scalp and the skull have a natural connection. The head of a man is linked with life, and he was prepared to yield his breath cheerfully." Hence, the names of all such martyrs have become an integral part of the daily Sikh prayer. Various historical facts reveal that even during the darkest and extremely hostile circumstances, when the very existence of the Sikhs and their future generations were at stake, they did not do away with their distinct identity, which made them stand out as obvious targets in such an atmosphere of extreme terror. Such was their love and devotion to their distinct identity given to them by their 10th prophet that even while trying to hide in the forest due to extreme pressure and circumstances, they kept their identity intact and never tried to camouflage themselves by removing their turbans to refute their identity, which might have been the only option left to survive for any force of any origin or race in such a volatile situation. All these extremities reconfirm to date that no amount of endless sufferings and sacrifices for centuries could deter their conviction or devotion towards their faith and distinct identity. As per historical records, during one of the ruthless campaigns to wipe out the Sikhs, at least 7,000 Sikh men were killed and another 3,000 arrested, who were to be executed mercilessly in various inhuman ways. Their heads were piled up in pyramids and their bodies buried under the walls of a mosque. This carnage is known as the Holocaust of Sikhs. But in spite of this, nothing could force them to do away with their faith and distinct identity in order to hide from the ruthless fundamentalist forces. According to a Muslim historian, Muhammad Latif, at one stage, as per the orders of the Mughals, thousands of Sikhs were mercilessly killed, while cartloads of them were brought to Lahore each day to be brutally hammered to death for not denouncing their faith and identity. The children were cut in pieces before the eyes of their mothers, and they were made to wear garlands of their children's severed heads and limbs. Young children were snatched away from their mothers and were ruthlessly killed by throwing and piercing their bodies in the air with pikes and swords. On the 5th of February 1762, the Sikhs were attacked by the pursuing Afghan forces of Ahmad Shah Abdali, a frequent Afghan invader, and it resulted in the biggest carnage known as the Great Holocaust in Sikh history, when over 10,000 Sikhs, mostly women, children and old men, lost their lives while upholding their faith and distinct identity. After the second great Holocaust of the Sikhs, their tradition of struggle, sacrifice and martyrdom to protect their faith and distinct identity continued without any permanent solution or relief for decades, except during the period of the Khalsa Empire of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. In fact, their struggle for peaceful existence has never come to an end completely, and it continues to date in one form or another. Therefore, it must be kept in mind that they have protected their faith and distinct identity by paying with their blood for centuries, and today their faith may not be under question, but their identity is. Had their faith been extinguished, their present identity would not have existed either. Hence, any kind of attack on that very identity in any way or form makes them feel that their faith is being attacked once again, directly or indirectly. So the inherent problem here is that the hair on the head is inseparably connected with the comb and the turban in Sikh religious discipline, and to be seen bareheaded in public is considered a serious offense and a transgression of the Sikh code of conduct. So if the turban of a Sikh has to be removed for any reason, then the long hair called kesh will also have to go eventually for various practical and logical reasons, which means that in due course of time, his distinct identity will be automatically lost along with the essence of his unique faith. All these glaring facts prove in one way or another that the turban is not merely a decorative headgear for the Sikhs, which can be worn or removed according to convenience. Rather, it is an integral part of their existence, and one cannot cut off a part of someone's existence and expect him to live a normal life. Philosophically, every fold of the turban of a devout Sikh is like a historical chapter of his blood-soaked history, which every Sikh carries along with him wherever he may choose to go or live with great pride and dignity. At the same time, it must be kept in mind that the turban is considered a symbol of honor and responsibility amongst the Sikhs and Indians from time immemorial. Even today, whenever honor is given or a responsibility is handed over, a big ceremony called Dastarbandi is held amongst the Sikhs. People travel from all over to the place of the turban tying sacred ceremony depending upon the magnitude of the responsibility and honor. Therefore, whenever the turban of the Sikhs is questioned for any reason, it makes them feel as if their honor is under threat. As per our honest understanding and observation of the entire Sikh history, their unimaginable agony, endless suffering, and immense irreparable loss for centuries cannot be described in words or explained through just a few prominent incidents from their unique history. According to recent observations of certain far-sighted and devout Sikh intellectuals, the Sikh identity has already been under threat for various reasons. It has become a matter of great concern to them that many from the younger generation are not being able to keep their identity intact due to either their ignorance, illiteracy, indifference, job requirements, or social, governmental, and global parameters. Such developments indicate that the distinct Sikh identity is already in extreme danger of becoming extinct, and if some devout Sikhs are trying to preserve it by holding on to their unique faith and traditional identity in this ever-changing modern world, why should any civilized and liberal government of today try to contribute to its extinction? The ironical fact about this situation is that if a turban remains on the head of a Sikh, no one loses anything. But if the turban is banned or removed for any reason, they lose everything along with their faith, identity, dignity, link with their roots, relationship with their blood-soaked history, and the unique heritage of countless martyrs, which is irreparable. Various other historical episodes can also be viewed as evidence of the fact that the long hair and turban of the Sikhs is far more important to them than their lives. Otherwise, they would not have chosen to be boiled, burnt, scalped and sawed alive after having witnessed the brutal killings of their women, children and elders through the centuries. In view of the recent events involving the ban on the turban of the Sikhs, it becomes extremely important to look at it in comparison to the Muslim cap, Arab headgear, veil, the skull cap of the Jews and the large visible cross of the Catholics. It is almost impossible to put the turban of the Sikhs in the category of other religious symbols, as the turban of the Sikhs goes far beyond the realm of religious symbolism. It has a centuries-old deep bond with the Sikh religious, historical, cultural and social heritage, besides being an indispensable symbol of Sikh identity all over the world. Their long unshorn hair is the fulfillment of the commandment of their 10th prophet, and it is an extremely important part of their historical struggle. With the passage of time, the turban has become an inseparable extension of their distinct identity, as it has been instrumental in covering, protecting and managing their long hair in order to avoid it from looking untidy and unkempt. From an objective point of view, it is apparent that the removal of the cap, headgear or cross would not make that kind of difference to anyone else the way it will to the Sikhs, because if for any reason their turban goes, then the hair too will have to go, and that would be like an attack on their faith. Furthermore, the turban cannot be compared to the veil either, because the veil conceals the identity of the wearer while the turban makes one stand out even in a large crowd. That is why the 10th prophet gave this unique and distinct identity to his devout Sikhs about 300 years back. After looking at various other options and suggestions, it does not seem possible for anyone to leave behind one's faith and religion along with its so-called conspicuous religious symbols and wear it again while coming out of a school, because it is engraved deeply in their system and psyche. Perhaps it might have been better to leave their different distinct identities intact in order to avoid resentment and hurt, as they are different by way of their origin. Their diverse color, culture, roots, upbringing, values or religious beliefs cannot be made equal just by removing their external religious symbols. Even among the international community, there have been various instances with regard to the turban of the Sikhs. In England, in 1976, the turban issue was raised and the House of Lords gave a verdict in the favor of the Sikhs, and their right to wear the turban was preserved. In America too, the Sikhs faced a similar issue, but their logical justifications and practical arguments made the authorities understand their just point of view. Today, all over the world, they are allowed to work in the army, police, as well as in various other governmental and private departments with their turbans on and faith intact. France itself is a part of the Western world, and if the rest of the world does not have a problem with the Sikhs wearing their turbans, then perhaps the liberal French government should not have any problem either in allowing the Sikhs the right to wear their turbans when their history and constitution support the basic freedom of humanity. The French authorities should also take into consideration the historical evidence which confirms to date that the ancestors of these very Sikhs fought alongside the Allied forces and the French in both the world wars while keeping their turbans on, and about 8,200 Sikhs are estimated to have lost their lives during these wars and are buried in military cemeteries in the north of France. It is said that in the battlefield, Sikh soldiers were told to remove their turbans in order to wear helmets for safety, but they refused to take off their turbans while assuring the authorities in writing that they would not claim any compensation if they died by getting shot in the head. So it seems very ironical that when the ancestors of these very Sikhs refused to remove their turbans in the battlefield while facing the risk of death, then perhaps it is a little illogical to ask the descendants of the same Sikhs to remove their turbans before entering their schools. As far as Sikhs are concerned, those who have shaved or trimmed their beards or cut their long hair for any reason are the ones who have fallen from grace by betraying their faith. However, the basic liberal principles of Sikhism do not force its religious discipline on even its own people, because according to Sikh philosophy, keeping one's faith or identity intact must depend upon one's devotional convictions and not any kind of compulsion. But if some committed and devout Sikhs are trying to uphold their faith while protecting their identity, why should any government force them to discard the same? Since in such trying and changing times, a single devout Sikh with his identity intact means far more to the protectors of Sikh faith than thousands of clean-shaven Sikhs put together. A fallen Sikh with a trimmed beard may not feel as hurt as a devout Sikh would if asked to remove his turban, because in comparison, a devout enlightened Sikh carries along with his turban the essence of his faith, the pride of his race, the dignity of his brave ancestors, and the honor of the supreme sacrifice of countless Sikh martyrs. In fact, by sticking to their faith and identity, they are not harming anyone in any way. Rather, they are paying a humble tribute to their entire heritage, and they must not be stopped from doing so. Therefore, it is not a question of merely removing the turban from the heads of a handful of Sikhs. It goes way beyond that, because it can become a question of a loss of identity for the coming Sikh generations, which is bound to hurt and make them suffer immensely, since it will be taken as a betrayal to their prophets, martyrs, and entire heritage. Perhaps in today's civilized world, no one should be forced into such a betrayal in any way or form. The French constitutional stand regarding the protection of human rights and liberty is well known all over the world, and their gift of Statue of Liberty to the United States of America is a testimony of their conviction. The religious symbols are an expression of individual faith and conviction, and the decision to ban them complies neither with the French constitutional principles of human liberty and freedom nor with their human rights stand. In fact, any individual of any origin who is a French citizen must have the right and liberty to uphold their faith and belief as per the liberal French constitution, since the people of multiple origins chose to be French citizens for the same reason. Perhaps it would not be fair to make so many innocent individuals of various origins suffer in such a liberal nation for the misdeeds of just one sect or a group of fundamentalists.
मंगल ढिल्लोन चैनल एक ऐसा चैनल जो आपका जीवन बदल सकता है, जैसे अब तक बहुतों का जीवन बदल चुका है। मंगल ढिल्लोन चैनल।